Don't give up on the system. This episode will be the one, the only, Dr. David Willard. He is the president of the Port Commission. Not only is he the president, it's the 7th largest port in the United States. The #1 port when it comes to military. Just know, this episode is gonna be fire. Let's get into the intro.
He told me, AJ, you either gonna be a politician or a pastor because you have a gift.
The sky's the limit, the sky's the limit. So fly. We do all this for the generations that come right after us. He tryna make a way, he made a way, and I got so much proof to show for it. The sky's the limit, the sky's the limit. Whoa.
I didn't choose politics. Politics chose me.
Tell me, who is David Willard?
First and foremost, I'm an educator. That's what's on my passport. I've been in education, the profession of education. I like to emphasize that. I've been in the profession of education for almost 30 years. Wow. I think in all of the disciplines that man has created, since man has walked upright on the earth, that being an educator might be the most important one. We have a lot of important positions out there: attorney, medical doctor, engineers, we have entrepreneurs, we have a lot of things. But the key component, the common denominator for all of those people in their own professions that they achieved is that they got a very good education. They had some teacher or teachers that helped them get to where they are. So I'm very proud to say that I'm an educator. It's not the only thing I am. I feel like I'm a community servant as well.
Yes, sir.
I come from that sort of background in my family. So it was the way that I was raised, to whom much is given, much is expected, of course. I'm also an author. I am a writer. I am an editor. With one of my professors in graduate school, he noticed my writing ability and said, hey, I think we could write a book together and put a book together. Published that while I was in grad school. So I'm a lot of things. I'm a husband, try to be a good husband. Just celebrated my 17th anniversary yesterday.
Wow. Congratulations to y'all, man.
That's right, to my wonderful wife, Kim. So I'm a lot of things, but I guess top of that list would be educator.
Man, you said something that intrigued me. You said you were an author. Kind of talk to me a little bit about why education and what made you really want to become an author. Well,
being able to communicate in this day and age, probably always, but being able to communicate effectively in this day and age is vitally, vitally important. And be able to communicate orally, like we're doing here, having a conversation and getting your points across, being able to think, to reason and put your thoughts together in your head and then express them, but also to do it on paper, to do it on a computer, on a laptop, however you're going to communicate written. More and more of that today is very, very important. We're getting a little bit more away from some of the jobs like working in steel mills and things like that were going on when I was a kid. And more of this now is about technology and sort of face-to-face communications that we're doing now, media, things like that. And so it's a very, very vital and important aspect of life. And being able to teach kids how to handle that, how to do it effectively, how to get their points across and get people to understand what they're coming from and how they're expressing themselves, I think is a vital important. And it's important to the nation, period. This democracy, any country that operates on a democracy operates on it being effective by having an educated citizenry. If your citizens are not educated to what's going on, to what's happening and how they play a role in that democracy and in that country moving forward, then you've got a dead society. So that all starts in the classroom. It starts with pre-K and kindergarten.
Wow.
It's important.
That was deep. Education is key. I still remember some of my teachers that impacted me the most coming up. So, educators are, in my opinion, it's kind of like sometimes that family atmosphere away from home.
Yep. I'll tell you something. This has been one of the most gratifying things that's happened to me in my 30 years of education. So I got into education when I was living in Washington, D.C. And my mother had infinite wisdom. I actually tried to start a business. So I dropped out of law school, which a lot of people don't know. My father was an attorney. He wanted his boys to go and follow in his footsteps. I did it for a year, really did not like it, and dropped out, and that was in Washington, D.C. I tried to start a business, tried to start a clothing business, a hip hop clothing business.
Okay.
It was right at the time that, like, Public Enemy, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, all these groups were like really hidden, and they were coming from a very Afrocentric perspective,
Okay.
and they were wearing, African medallions and kente cloth and all that stuff. So I figured, okay, there's an inroad here, and so I tried to do the same thing with my T-shirts and jeans, and I had jackets and the whole bit. But the money that I was making on the business was going to feed me, keep the lights turned on. My mother said, your business is never going to get off the ground if the little bit of money that you got coming in is going right back into your pocket to pay for food and lights and so forth and so on. She said, why don't you think about getting a sub job in Washington, D.C.? You be finished by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The rest of your time can be spent working on the business. You can do things in the evening. You don't have to do any, homework and that kind of stuff. So I got into it and really, really liked it, really loved it. And started at a school called Sidwell Friends in Washington, D.C., which is a very famous school nationwide. It's where the Obama kids were educated. It's where Clinton's daughter was educated. It's even where Nixon's daughter was educated. So very, very well-known school. Ended up going to a school called the Langley School. And the gratifying thing that happened was last year. A young man that I taught 30 years ago found me on LinkedIn, reached out and said, Dr. Willard, I am so glad that I found you. He said, I have 2 young daughters today. Both of them are starting in preschool and going into kindergarten. And I wanted to tell you what an impact you had on my life when you were my 8th grade English teacher. Wow. He said, and he's now in his 30s. He's like 34, 35 years old. He said, you believed in me. I was a knucklehead. He said, I was a knucklehead in the classroom. He said, I remember at a parent-teacher conference, and I attended that conference with my mother. And you told my mother, he is a really, really smart kid, but he will not pay attention in class. He will not focus on what it is that I'm trying to teach him, but he could rise and do anything that he wants to if he would just focus in and pay attention and take his studies seriously. And so 30 years later, he tracked me down and told me, I'm a lawyer today. I'm a successful lawyer working on Wall Street. I've got 2 young children. Oh my God. He said, and of all of the educators that I've had in that time period, you and one other college professor were the 2 that had the most impact on my life for me being where I am today. He ended it by saying, I hope my daughters have a chance to have somebody teach them and be an educator to them as you were to me when I was in the 7th and 8th grade. That, bar none, is the most gratifying thing. It said off the bat what I decided to do with my life, and the path I decided to take with my life was the right path. God directed me in that direction and put me in that direction. It was not something I ever grew up thinking I was going to do and be, even though my mother and all sorts of people in my family were educators, but it was not something that I said, I'm going down this path. But he said, this is for you. And that was the proof in the pudding. I've had other instances where former students have reached out and said, thank you so much for all that you did for me, and they've stayed in contact. But that one really, it hit home. It meant a lot to me. So that's the importance of education.
I think it kind of has a lot of substance to the purpose of this podcast, and it's called "Don't Give Up on the System." And just imagine if you did give up on that particular student, would the outcome have been the same? Something important happened to me. I subbed too when I first started out of college. I was a substitute teacher at South Park Middle School, and I had a student who was able to come up to me and tell me the first time he ever voted was for me because the impact I made on him while he was in middle school. And man, that really made me feel good, because a lot of young people don't understand and may not care about voting, but for him to say he had that much respect for me, not only did he vote, he encouraged his friends to come out and vote as well. So
I had one of those myself when I ran, the same thing. A guy who was 18 when I ran for port commissioner, and his dad brought him to the polls out there at Rogers Park and said, this is his first time voting and he's voting for you. And I said, okay, that's a pretty good move. That's a pretty good move. Makes you feel good. Yeah,
so your first race was pretty competitive, right? I remember it. It wasn't a small amount of people in your first race. So how did you come to serve as port commissioner of Beaumont, and what inspired you to pursue this particular role?
People may or may not know, but I'm born and raised here in Beaumont, 5 generations deep. The Willard family's been here for a long time. And I actually worked at the port when I was a teenager.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to buy a car. And my dad said one summer, it was during the summertime, and I wanted to buy a car during the summer, at the end of the summer, and be able to get back and forth to school. And so I told my dad one day, I said, I really want to buy a car. And so my dad said, well, you really need a job. And so I said, okay. He said, I'll help you. I'll help you find a job. My dad knew a lot of people in this area, knew a lot of things. He said, give me a couple of days and I'll come back with something for you I think maybe you can handle, you can get into. I'm thinking, at the time, Dillard's out at the mall was Josky's growing up.
Okay.
And I'm thinking to myself, okay, you find me a nice little job at Josky's, I'll give me a discount on some clothes, and, work a shift or two, that kind of thing. So he came home one day from work, from the office, he said, I got you a gig. And I said, yeah, what is that? What is it, Daddy? He said, you're going down the docks and work down on the docks. So I said, I'm going down on the what? On the where? I didn't even realize Beaumont had a port.
Yeah.
And he said, you can make real good money down there. He said, I know a couple of people in the union, and they said, send him on down here. Mm-hmm. And at the time, the port was a grain-centered port. They were through sacks of flour is basically what the port was all oriented around. Mm-hmm. I wasn't in the union, but they always needed people because folks in the union didn't always show up. Mm-hmm. And so they would need somebody to, take those shifts if they didn't show up that day. Had to be down there by 5 o'clock in the morning. You had to be the first in line. By 5:30, they were picking and see, who was going to fill in for folks who weren't there, who were, in the union. Mm-hmm. First in, first come kind of deal. So the earlier you got there, the better chance you had of actually getting on one of those ships and throwing sacks of flour. I did that all summer long, and made really, really good money and purchased my car at the end of the summer. Got along really well with everybody down there. First, they didn't really kind of want me down there because they figured I was going off to college and mm-hmm. I wasn't trying to do this for a living.
Long term, yeah.
Yeah, and so they were a little, little kind of standoffish a little bit, but I kept showing up every morning. Mm-hmm. I was down there every morning by 5 o'clock. And after one time, I remember going down there, we got to the ship, and you had to do it in pairs because the sacks of flour were 140 pounds.
Wow.
So you couldn't lift that by yourself. So you had to have one on one end of the sack, and you kind of toss it. It was like a system. Mm-hmm. And basically, to tell you the truth, first couple of weeks, nobody would work with me. So I was actually down there trying to throw 140 pounds by myself. So I remember one day, I kept showing up in the second or third week, and this young buck who was down there, he was probably in his 30s or so, said, come on, everybody called me Lil Mo because that's my dad's name was Elmo. Yeah. Come on, Lil Mo, I'll throw them sacks with you. And he taught me how to do it, and it broke the ice. Yeah. And then for the rest of the summer, everybody, would work with me, and I stayed down there all summer. Sometimes I'd go back in the evening. We'd be down there from about 5 until 5, mm-hmm. and we'd come back at 7 if we had a ship that we had to get out. We'd come back at 7 in the evening and go to about 12 or 1. And you got double time for that. Yeah. You got paid double time for that. Yeah. So that's how I got my car. So all that to say, Pete Shelton retired. He'd been on the port commission for about 30 years. The seat opened up. I'd always been interested in politics. I'd always been involved in politics, not here locally in Beaumont, but wherever I lived. And somebody let me know that the seat was coming vacant, and I said, I think I can do some good with this. And so I threw my hat in the ring.
And I think that's pretty interesting. You were in high school and you were disciplined enough to get up around 5 in the morning consistently to go accomplish a goal, getting you a vehicle to get you transportation. I think that's an important aspect for our younger viewers watching, to look at, your dad, you had one expectation and this is what it actually turned out to be. Yeah. So. Yeah. Man, that's an interesting story. I didn't know that. He
was that kind of guy. I mean, he was the type of person. My father never met a stranger. He never mm-hmm. met anybody that he treated everybody the same. I mean, everybody, every walk of life. And if you were the governor, you got the same Elmo Willard as if you were just getting out of jail, or mm-hmm. if you, or whatever, if you were, driving a bus or whatever else. And he wanted both me and my brother and my cousin. I have a first cousin he was very close with also. He wanted all three of us to approach life in that same way, to, there were no high jobs, there were no low jobs, there were no important people and unimportant people. There were just people, and there were just jobs.
Yes.
And you were going to get comfortable doing all of them. Like, you weren't going to be working. You want a job? You want to buy a car? Okay, you're not going to be working in an air-conditioned store all summer long, from a 3 or 4 hour shift and come on home and, have a good time all summer long. I'm going to get you a job. We're going to see how serious you really want to buy a car. And he got me a job. It taught me a lot at a very early age. I loved it. I really did. I worked a lot of other blue-collar jobs, actually, years later, even when I was still in college and got out of college. I did all kinds of jobs. And, I worked in a Pepsi Cola bottling plant one summer. And
I did too. I worked at Coca-Cola.
Yeah, okay. I ran the deal where they fill up, put it in the cans.
I was filling up the shelves at the stores. Yeah.
And that was a great job. I made good money doing that. Got along with everybody. It's good to sort of to meet people where they are.
I think it's interesting you said people. I remember when I first got on city council, one of my biggest focuses during budget season, I seen the city of Beaumont employees' minimum wage was only $7.33. And I looked at the economy we're living in, and I started thinking about how can our employees afford a house and, take care of things with that being, minimum wage. And I was told by other council members that you have to have a low man. And that really made me push and fight hard because I believe everyone deserves to make a decent living and live a good life where they can take care of their families.
I agree.
And one of my projects, one of my first big accomplishments, we pushed minimum wage from $7.33 to $15 an hour.
Wow.
We did a salary comprehension study, and it was proof that we weren't paying, competitive wages.
Right.
So that was one of my first big projects, and it resonated with me because you said you've worked at all levels. Like you are now Dr. David Willard, but you started off tossing 120-pound sacks. And it kind of made me think about that instance. And you talked about your dad, and something I want you to talk more about because, just researching, I seen it's even a library named after your dad, in Beaumont. Can you just tell us a little bit more about your dad?
Yeah. Well, my dad was an attorney. There's a library out in the North End named after him. Actually, was the first African American in the city to have a public building named after him.
Wow.
And he, my family was very progressive. African American family, was always very involved in the community, going back to my great-great-grandfather. I've got a lot of folks who really achieved great things on the Willard side of the family, on both sides of my family, but particularly here in Beaumont. All of them trying to help better the conditions, particularly of their people, of African American people, people of African descent, but also better the community as a whole. And my father was the product of that. His dad and his uncle started the first mortuary, black-owned mortuary business here in Beaumont, Willard and Willard, mortuary and ambulance service, because there was a need for that. So there are a lot of accomplishments that he grew up witnessing, but all of these accomplishments were for the betterment of the community. It wasn't just about putting money in people's in their pockets and, I got mine, you get yours kind of thing.
Yeah.
My dad wanted to be an attorney. He went to Fisk University as an undergraduate school, and then from there he applied and got into Howard Law School. Howard Law School at the time was the university for civil rights law. It was actually the training ground for civil rights law to train young black lawyers and young lawyers, period, whoever wanted to go there, but it was Americans who went there to get out and to change the system of segregation through legal means by using the court system and the Constitution to change and dismantle the system of segregation. And that's what he was taught. My dad actually worked on the Brown versus Board of Education decision.
Wow.
He worked with Thurgood Marshall. He worked with Oliver Hill. He worked with James Nabert and all those lawyers who put that together. He was the chair of what they call the student critique team.
Okay.
So they got 9 students together to help critique the case, and they were supposed to tear apart the case in front of Thurgood Marshall and all the other lawyers, pretending as though they were the justices on the Supreme Court, as to how they would come back at this case and try to tear it apart. So one of the 3 or 4 probably landmark decisions that the Supreme Court has ever decided, my dad was a part of that. Graduated in 1954, came back here to Beaumont, partnered up with another lawyer who had graduated the year before in Howard Law School, Theodore Johns. They formed a partnership, and they set about tearing about segregation in this area, and they did it. They won every case that they tried along those lines. Changed the school system, the parks, the jobs, you name it. They tore all that apart. Lamar University, desegregated Lamar, it was Lamar Tech at the time. And so for his efforts and for everything that he did and did for this area, unfortunately he died early. He died at the age of 60. And then when Mayor Moore was mayor and when John Davis was on the council, they were going to establish a new library in the North End, and that was John Davis's ward, the one that Audubon represents now. And they put up my father's name to have it named after, and it passed. Thankfully, it passed. So it was a great honor to him, and unfortunately, he wasn't there to see it, but it was still a great honor for him. So.
I mean, I like the fact that you said great honor, and I didn't have the opportunity to meet your dad, but I heard amazing things about him, and I have an opportunity to actually meet you. I come to you as one of the people that I kind of let mentor me and guide me when I'm making decisions, and just my relationship with you, I can only imagine how good of a man your father was, because I know how you are as an individual. So I just want to highlight that and let you know that personally in front of all our viewers.
I take that as a compliment, AJ, because I've known you. I met you, through running for that. We met right over there across the street from where I live in Reverend Robinson's church in the basement. That was the first candidate forum that I attended, and you were there. And I watched you. You were on one side, and I was sitting on the opposite side. And I was like, that's a comer right there. This boy here. What I really liked about it was that you were young then. You're still young now. One of the things we talk about in Beaumont so much is that we have a brain drain here. We have very smart people who come through our school system here, but they go away to college and they never return.
Never come back.
And that's a real negative for, and I don't mean negative that it's Beaumont's fault, but it's a real problem for a community to have their best and their brightest go away and then use that energy and that brain power for something else or somewhere else. But you decide to come back here and decide to make a change and a difference in your own home community. And that's always been something that I've been very happy about and very proud of you. And not only have you wanted to do it, but you have done it. You got out there and you make a big difference in this community. You're very positive. You've got young people who follow you and pay attention to what you do. And I think you make real differences in people's lives around here. And that's a very, very important thing. So to say that, for you to say that to me is I see that as a real compliment. So,
appreciate that, man. That's something I think we don't do well with generations. We don't have that dialogue and an open relationship as we should, Right. Someone to lean on that actually been through some things. Like even you teaching me about image and, conversation and how to talk. You taught me about image without telling me. You taught me about image by me viewing how you showed up consistently, how you carried yourself. And I learned just by watching. And you didn't even tell me that. I just learned by watching, so I appreciate that.
No problem, man. Anytime I can be of some help.
Appreciate you. Beaumont has faced its share of challenges, from natural disasters to economic shifts. How has the city, in your view, preserved and adapted over the years?
They're hanging in there. I think the one thing that people really, this question comes up a lot, and people are talking about it all the time now, as well they should. But the one thing that people realize is that this is something new for Beaumont, really. I mean, we've always had storms, but the volume of storms that we deal with now and the power of those storms has changed exponentially from when I was a kid. I never ran from a hurricane when I was growing up here in Beaumont. Wow. Never. There was never even any thought of leaving this area because a hurricane had hit the Gulf and was hitting Galveston or coming this way. Because by the time it got to Beaumont, it was dead basically. It was just rain.
It was slowed down.
Yeah, just some, a few strong winds and some rain. But what we're experiencing now with this climate change and with these storms that we deal with year in and year out is something that we've never seen before. And so, although it's unfortunate because people end up suffering, it's going to take a while for our community to really put the resources together and put the infrastructure together to be able to handle this, because you know, this is coming fast and furious, and it's just by the grace of God that these last several years we haven't had a direct impact. But you know, I don't want to put it out there in the ether, but you know, more than likely one of these times it's going to hit us. And hopefully we are using this time, this grace period that we've had over the last 2 or 3 years, to sort of put things in place to help people out. We have a flooding problem. We know we have a flooding problem. The West End floods very quickly, floods a lot. You know, other parts of the city flood. You know, just this year, the house that I grew up in, Beryl, which really wasn't that big of a storm, it wasn't projected to be that big of a storm, but it knocked down a tree that had been standing in my childhood backyard, you know, over on Palestine Street. It knocked down a tree, hit the roof of my house, almost burned my house down, almost burned my childhood house down.
I didn't know that.
Just getting it back up and running. Just last year, I had cut down a lot of trees in the backyard, trying to get ready for storm season, and you know, thinking, trying to get ahead of it. You know, that particular tree that fell, the guy who cut it down said, "Man, it would take a once in a million storm to knock that tree down. This thing is solid as an oak. You know, it's going to be here for a minute." That tree fell from Beryl, which really wasn't even that big of a storm. So it's hard to gauge and hard to be prepared for something like that. Even when you do your best and try to get ready for something just like that, you know, something can come along and a freak thing can happen, and the next thing you know, your house is endangered. So I say all that to say that I think Beaumont is doing what it can at this particular time. Hopefully the leadership, Mayor West, the council, Drainage District 6, all of the other sort of places that we have who are sort of dealing with this, the state, you know, it's good that we have Speaker of the House who's from this area and knows about this area and, you know, is trying to help with this sort of thing. Hopefully we're utilizing the time that we've had over these last couple of years to sort of get ready for if a big one really comes along. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It definitely does. Like, one thing I learned when I got on council, we have something called a general fund, which is our savings account. And I understand when storms come, you go for your FEMA funding to come back to the city. A lot of people don't know it can take years to get that funding back. So it's important to be fiscally conservative and have a healthy general fund so we have the revenue to fix things if a storm comes, because we might have to go years before we actually get that refund.
Get that refund. Yeah, I'm still waiting on the insurance money from the damage to my mom's house. So, you know, it takes a while. But I think as this continues to progress and we see how serious it is and we see how other communities are devastated, we see what happened in North Carolina, we see what happened in other parts of the country with these last few storms, you know, hopefully we're able and we're ready to sort of, you know, deal with it when it hits here.
Yes, sir.
And unfortunately, it's the one thing that really does bring us together. You know, we got a lot of divisiveness.
It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, black, white, brown, Hispanic. When a storm happens, one thing I can say about this area, everybody comes together.
They come
and
together.
We help each other.
When I saw what is it? What do they call it? Do they call it the Cajun? What do they call it?
The Cajun Navy.
The Cajun Navy.
They were down here pulling folks out of their houses.
Yeah. When I saw that, and those are folks who, you know, they're not coming to your house asking who you vote for. Are you Republican? Are you Democrat? You know, did you go to Hebert or did you go to South Park? They ain't asking none of them questions. They're pulling up to your house in a boat, and they're pulling you out and pulling your family out to safety. And, you know, like I said, it's unfortunate that it takes something like that to pull people together. But this area really does seem to come together and reach out and try to help one another when disaster strikes.
Know what's crazy while we're on this topic? Man, I had a neighbor named Devin Dart. He's a principal at Vidor, Texas right now. Two completely different backgrounds. He moved in, young family. Our kids are kind of wave and speak to each other. We had a storm, and we happened to still be in the neighborhood, my family and his, and we couldn't get out. The water was rising towards my house, and we just had my youngest daughter, and I'll never forget, he had a boat, and he said, I want to take his family out before I take my own family out. And Just shout out to Devin. I'll never forget that moment because we couldn't drive out.
Right,
The
right.
water was rising.
Right.
And he got my family out on his boat and his friends, helped get us out. And that was a pretty big thing on how we can come together and really help each other.
People need to remember that I think the goodness of people, there's a lot of goodness in people. We fight, we bicker, there's a lot of divisiveness that goes on now, a lot of finger pointing, a lot of ugliness that goes on out there. But there are also a lot of good people out there who want to do the right thing. And when the chips are usually down, that's when you see the best of people come out. And all of that stuff that makes us fight and argue and cuss one another and all that kind of stuff, all that stuff disappears, man. It all just, floats away. And if we could think about and remember those kinds of times when we ain't dealing with storms and floods and people's lives, that kind of stuff, we'd be a lot better off, be a whole lot better off.
Much respect. The Port of Beaumont plays a vital role in the region's economy. How do you see its future evolving, and what steps are you taking to ensure it remains a key asset for this community?
Port of Beaumont is extremely important to this area and to the state of Texas. There's all we need to do is really maintain the course. No pun intended. It has got great leadership with Chris Fisher. It's a great work environment down there. We have people today. We had a meeting today. We had our monthly meeting today. We had people that we celebrated who have worked down there for 10 years, more. Some folks have been down there for 20 years. We got people who have been down there for 6 and 7 years. It's a great working environment. The salaries are great. You can make a very good living there. And that's all because of the leadership at the top. They've created this organization that people really want to be a part of. Back 20 years ago or so, the Port of Beaumont and the state of Texas didn't even recognize how important ports play in the economy and just in general nationwide. But all that has changed in recent years. We've had record revenue. We set a record in terms of tonnage at the port. We did 11,100,000 tons. Tonnage is one of the ways you measure the health and the strength of a port, is how much tonnage is coming through that port. We've set records last 3 out of the 4 years that I've been there working with the port, both revenue-wise and from tonnage-wise. We have a lot of great business partners that we deal with. We've got leadership in Austin now who recognize the vitality of the ports in this area. And so they're directing funding, state funding. We've gotten federal funding in terms of some of the things that we want to do in terms of improvements at the port, in terms of our docks and our wharf space. All of this has been grant money, some of it state, some of it federal money. We are the 7th largest port in the nation in regards to tonnage, which is, when you think about it, is pretty incredible when you've got Los Angeles out there and you got New Orleans and you got all these huge ports. That Beaumont is as highly rated as it is sort of nationwide. I think we just need to continue doing what we're doing. There's no change of direction. There's no anything that we need to do differently. We've got a great commission. We've got great commissioners down there. We work well as a team. And I think we just, like I said, we stay the course and the port will continue to grow. Our projected revenues and projected tonnage and 24, 25 for year 24 and 25 are all increasing and going upwards. And I think that we'll stay this route for quite some time to come. It's a central cog in the transfer of goods, not only nationwide, but worldwide. Beaumont is a central cog. It's the #1 military port in the world, which people don't really understand just how important that is. That means that if anything goes down, you hear about all these fights and fusses that are going on between nations. If anything goes down across the world, or unfortunately in this country, the Port of Beaumont is one of the central locations for military cargo, to dispense it in the United States of America or dispense it across the world if a conflict were to arise. And we just have, our director of sort of business operations, getting business to come to the port His name is Ernest Besdick, and he just received a very prestigious award from the National, it's one of those acronyms and I kind of forget, but it basically is the Armed Services Transportation Area.
Oh, wow.
And it's only given out to very few people, folks who are, have spent a great deal of time and energy in making sure that the military operations and the military cargo that's needed to get where it needs to get to go and is handled properly when it's in port. He received that award just at the last conference that took place this year. And so that's the kind of leadership that we have down there, and it's why the results that we have at the port are like they are. So,
Yeah. So this podcast is to talk about the system and also to highlight great things going on in the community that I represent. And I want to highlight those things. And you said the 7th largest port in the world and the #1 resource when it comes to the military. And I think that's huge for our viewers and our community to know. I think it's essential that they know these details about what we have going on right here in our community. Yeah. But another thing I kind of want to piggyback off of while we're on this topic is, can you kind of explain how does Port Commission work? What do you guys do? How does that government kind of work?
Sure. So it's a commissioner, a board of commissioners. And just like any other board for an organization, our #1 responsibility is a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that revenues are up and expenses are down. So that's the #1 thing that we pay attention to and look out for. Other than that, it's about making sure that the facilities themselves, because I like to think of the port, I like to think of any port as sort of a middleman, you know, bringing people together. You know, they're shipping goods, they're utilizing our port for either, you know, moving on to another location, moving somewhere else, or for storage for a period of time for those goods. And so we have to make sure that our facilities are up to par, that our facilities are top rate, that our docks, that our wharf space, that our storage facilities, all of those sorts of things that are, you know, we have cranes down there that can do heavy lifting. All of that has to be state of the art. Otherwise, those moving that cargo will go somewhere else to transport their goods. So besides making sure the revenues are up and that we're keeping the expenses down, we're also making sure that maintaining the health of the port, that it can withstand some of these storms that come through here. That, you know, some of these winds and some of these big storms that come through, the port is not damaged in any way, and so that shuts the port down for a period of time. And, you know, that harms business. We have folks who are doing a great job in regards to understanding the grant situation and being able to get grant money and funding for all of our projects, all of our improvement projects, all of our engineering projects. We have 20 projects on tap for 24 and 25. And the vast majority of them, they'll come up to about $450, $460 million to cost in terms of all of these improvement projects, these engineering projects. And more than half of that is going to be funded through grants that we've reached out, federal
That's a
and
huge
state.
win. People understand that grant money is money out there that this area needs to take advantage of, and you guys are doing it.
Yep.
You know?
So that's not money coming out of the port's pocket. That's money that's, you know, granted to us by state and federal government because of the importance that they see that our port plays. And so that's revenue that we can sort of maintain or get additional revenue because we're not coming out of pocket to pay for these facilities and to pay to improve, you know, our dock and wharf space. We have rail lines down there at the port. So anything that you could possibly want in terms of the movement of goods from one point to the other, the Port of Beaumont has put in place. And not only is it in place, but it's actually top of the line of any place else that you could go in this area. So,
Before I move to the next question, it's a quick topic that I want to touch on that I researched. I looked at, seen you guys had a great maritime program.
Yes.
And I also seen that you guys are putting a business incubator, to my understanding. You guys are kind of having that under construction right now. Can you just kind of touch on those two topics before we move on?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because one of the things when I got on the commission was, you know, I thought that I could help maintain the port's preeminence in being a top-rated port. But I also wanted to reach into the community and let folks in the community know about the opportunities in the maritime industry, because there are a lot of opportunities in the maritime industry, particularly for young people. It's a great career. You make very, very good money at it. And Sade Chick, who is the director of corporate affairs, whom I'm sure you know.
That's my neighbor.
And just about everybody in Beaumont in this area now knows Sade. She and I have been working together ever since I've been on the commission to try to identify training programs that young people or anybody can take advantage of if they want to explore the maritime industry. And we found a great program in Maryland. It's called the Paul Hall Training Center. It's an absolutely free, don't come a dime out of your pocket training program that takes a little over a year to complete. And you don't need a GED, you don't need a high school diploma. You can even have a criminal record as long as it's not for a violent offense. You can get into the program. You have one test that you need to take in terms of your application process, and you can get into the program. Within 6 months of being in the program, you're actually paid to finish it.
Oh, wow.
So at about I think it's about 3 to 4 months into the program, you're paid $1,300 a month as you're completing the program. And once you get towards the end of the program, once you get to that 8th, 9th month, you actually could be making anywhere between $5,000 to $8,000 a month to complete a free program.
Oh my God.
$8,000 a month turns out to be close to $90,000 a year that you're making
Six
to complete
figures.
a program.
No
Exactly.
GED.
No GED.
No high school diploma.
Which you can also get through the program. So I've reached out to the area churches. I continue to sort of broadcast this everywhere. I got the flyer in my pocket, as a matter of fact. I brought the flyer with me. And I continue to try to broadcast this and let people in high schools know, let people in junior high schools know about this program. We've had some success. It's a big sell for someone to decide that they're going to leave this area and move to Maryland. People, a lot of times, who've never been away from this area, been away from their families. So it hasn't been tens of hundreds of people who've taken advantage of it, but we have had some people that have taken us up on the program. We even picked up their expenses because they didn't have the money to fly there.
It's amazing.
It is about $1,500 out of pocket that you need in terms of airline ticket and all that kind of stuff to get to the program. So they just didn't have that money. So we actually paid out of our own pocket to pick up their airfare, pick up the little bit of change they might need in their pocket to get to Paul Hall. And we've had about 6 or 7 people who've entered into the program and have either completed the program or close to completing the program. One of which called one of the pastors here and said, thank you, Pastor. You saved my life. I had nothing going on at all in my life. Now I got money in my pocket. I got a career. I know where I'm headed. And all of that was thanks to you and, telling me about this program, telling me about this industry, and helping me get into this. So that's been one of the biggest things that I've wanted to do, was to use my position on the commission to get out there and let people know that this is a great opportunity that folks can take advantage of. And not only is it a great opportunity, it's actually a free opportunity where you can change your life. You can literally change your life or find a new life if that's what you're looking for. The other program, the Business Incubator Program, is just kind of getting underway. We're also utilizing that to try to get into the schools and let the younger kids know about the maritime industry. There's a Sea Scouts program too, which Sade is a big proponent of and does a lot of work with, which is also about teaching them sort of hands-on skills that they need to be in the maritime industry. So being on a ship, knot tying, all of those kinds of things you can learn when you get into the Sea Scouts program. That's a great program as well. We've had certain teenagers who've gone through that, one of which went through it and then became an intern down at the port. Oh, wow. And is now in college. I think she's at Lamar. She could be at Texas A&M. I can't remember which one, but is pursuing maritime as far as what she's studying in college. So that was one of the things that I wanted to really sort of, take advantage of. I didn't want to just sit on the commission, which was a great thing to do, but I also wanted to let the community know about what opportunities are down there and how they could utilize someone like myself and like other commissioners to get into those opportunities and to find a career and a life for themselves. So, and hopefully they'll come back to this area. You get in the maritime industry, you can go anywhere in the world that you want, but hopefully they'll come back to this area, and with that kind of money you can buy a house, you know, you can start raising a family, you know, you can start putting down roots again in this area and give back to this area, which is what young people to do. So.
And even with the revenue, I just wanted people to understand it's important how important the port is to Beaumont. It's essential to our economic development because that's one of our biggest employers and actually revenue generators in Beaumont.
Yes.
And those taxes help fix roads, fix different properties. It helps do a lot of things, as well as employees having the salaries to buy homes, because those homes actually are taxes collected from properties that benefits the city. So it's great to have you guys as a partner doing great things in Beaumont.
Yeah, I think it's last count. We just did an economic survey, and I could have my figures just wrong. We just went over that earlier today. But I think it's 83,000 jobs that have been created for
Jesus
this area
Christ.
through the port, direct, indirect jobs that have been created for people in this area because of what the port is doing and how it's doing, how successful it is.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of great economic impact that I don't think people really realize. We're going to publish that report very, very soon and just let the public know what a vital resource the Port of Beaumont actually is. A lot of people are starting to get wind of that now and understand how important it is, but the more we can kind of publicize that, the better, I think, for the community.
So we're going to kind of shift gears. We're talking about headlines and news, and we've seen other ports face strikes and closures recently, causing big delays in shipping. How's the Port of Beaumont handling any worker concerns or potential issues to make sure operations keep running smoothly?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's on a lot of people's minds because we just had a big strike. That strike wasn't going to impact the port because they were mostly targeting container ports, and Beaumont isn't a container port. It's a cargo port, but we don't have the space to be a container port. So they were going to strike, Los Angeles and some of these other ports that have containers, that have the containers, the space to house containers. Another thing that people didn't quite realize was that there was legislation that was passed in the mid-40s called the Taft-Hartley Act, and I think I'm got that right in terms of the name. Taft-Hartley Act passed in the mid-1940s, and it actually allows the federal government to step in and end a strike if that strike is having some sort of detrimental impact on the economy of the nation.
It's good information to know.
And so that's why they let them, the government was hands off about it for the first few days because they figured that they would reach some sort of agreement, which they did, thankfully. But if it had looked like it was going to go on for some longer period of time, then more than likely the government would have stepped in and said, okay, we all need to sit at the table and we need to come to a resolution about this because this is impacting the nation and the economic health of the nation. People don't realize that still that 90% of all goods are transported via ship in this world.
Wow.
Most people would probably think planes, Amazon and,
18-wheelers,
FedEx and 18-wheelers, all the 18-wheelers, like you said, seen up and down the highway. But 90% of the goods, 85 to 90% of all goods that we need to survive in this country and throughout the world are still transported by ship. So you can't allow ports to shut down for weeks at a time. We saw what happened with COVID when that did happen. The backlog that caused.
Yeah, definitely hurt the economy.
Exactly. So Taft-Hartley was put in place just for that reason, and if they had not come to some sort of agreement within that short period of time like they did, it's great that they did because they reached something that the unions were happy with. But if they had been at loggerheads for any longer than that, it probably would have come to a close anyway. So.
Yeah. I like that question because a lot of people and probably viewers were very concerned with that particular topic. You've seen people start to buy up everything in the stores, and just to know some inside intellect on how that actually works is very important for
Yep.
the people watching.
Let you know about
Yeah.
what government can and cannot do.
Yeah.
And, everybody, I know I'm certainly am pro-union, and I want to get, the highest wages and fairest
I am
wages that we
yeah,
can
yeah.
for our union workers and for those in the union. But still, they felt that legislation needed to be in place to make sure that, the country as a whole can't come to a screeching halt because you've got a labor dispute and you've got a dispute with labor and that sort of thing. So they did reach an agreement, reached it within a matter of days, and everything is back up and running now.
It's always to see people be able to sit down in the room and, solve the problem without it having to go to those measures. So that was a plus, man.
Right.
So how has living in Beaumont and working in Beaumont shaped your perspective on leadership, especially when it comes to pushing for systematic improvements in a small city?
Yeah, that's a really big question. I'm committed to it because I've got such deep roots here. And what has been beneficial to me is to interact with other people who also is equally committed, such as yourself, those on the council. I've gotten to know some of the people on the Commissioner's Court, on Jefferson County Commissioner's Court. And then of course the people who are there at the port that I work with on a regular basis. And I feel as though the leadership is in good hands. We could always use some younger voices, I believe, and want them to take part in improving their surroundings and improving this community and having a say in this community, what they'd like to see changed about it or what they'd like to see improved or what they like about it, period. And so being boots on the ground with this has been eye-opening for me. You can watch it from the sidelines or watch it from above, and you can criticize and you can, say what should be done. But once you kind of throw your hat in the ring and get in there and start interacting with the people who are doing it on a day in, day out basis, it sort of changes your perspective on things. I am concerned about things like climate change and how that might impact this area and these storms that are going on. I'm glad to see that some attention is being paid to younger people in terms of in this area, in terms of their way of life, their quality of living. We've got a very good university here that seems to continue to improve.
It's taking off right now.
We've got a great LIT is booming as well. And so we really want to keep some of these folks around when they get these degrees. And so that means quality of life issues for younger people. What will, once they graduate at the age of 22 and 23, more than likely they're not going to get married right then and there. They want to have places to go to. They want to, have entertainment that they can take part in on the weekends, and, on the evenings, and all of those kinds of things, which I think is what the leadership of this community and what it seems like the council is trying to address now, looking at downtown redevelopment, all of those kinds of issues to help retain and even attract some people to this area who may not have grown up here, may not be living here now, but could see it as a good cost of living. You're still not paying out the nose to get a house here. You're still not dealing horribly with traffic. You can get just about anywhere you want to get to in town within 10 to 20 minutes. All those kinds of things are, because I've lived in cities. Lived in Washington, D.C., lived in Chicago, lived in Boston, Massachusetts. All of those kinds of things can be nightmares, man, I mean, I lived in Washington, D.C. You could lose, on any given day, you could lose 2 or 3 hours just sitting in your car, in traffic, And there's a lot to offer there. You got museums, you got all kinds of stuff that you can do, blah, blah, blah. But, when you're looking to spend 2 and 3 hours a day in your car.
Made me think about being there.
Yeah, it kind of, you start thinking like, okay, is this worth it, Cost of living, rent an apartment, buy a house, all those kinds of things that you start thinking about long term. Can I really afford to be here and live here? So if we can put some things in place that would be attractive to a younger audience, to younger people, then we can attract some of these people to come and live here because there are some benefits to living in this area that they may not see in Houston, that they may not see in Dallas or Austin, that kind of thing.
Yeah, something I intentionally and purposely do. I always form relationships with younger people. I make it a point to reach down and pull younger people up. And, you know, my goal is to make sure Beaumont isn't just a place you pass through.
Yep.
I want it to become a destination, somewhere you want to stay and be.
Yep.
And I can kind of see a level of excitement starting to form, and I'm kind of glad you look at it from that perspective too, because you grow a population with younger people want to be in this community.
Yep.
And I think, you know, if we keep pushing and keep doing things that attract younger people, I think it'll come. Specifically, some of these jobs you guys are offering, I think that's very impressive for that younger generation.
I really like the program that you guys put in place where you were taking folks to Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. I didn't know about that program. I read about it for the first time this year.
I'm thankful. That was one of my main goals, to create that youth council and actually let them see what we deal with in government. And, man, just to see some of those kids who, it kind of made my heart smile, because some of them never traveled outside of Houston.
Yep.
Some of them never been outside of Beaumont. They were able to come to Washington, D.C.
Right.
Look at the White House, tour the White House, and
Yep.
that was huge, man.
I worked in an education program one time. It's called LEADA, and it's still in. I worked the very first summer that they started. It's called Leadership for a Diverse America. Mm-hmm. And what it did was it went in and into communities all over this country, and it found kids who were coming from impoverished backgrounds but were doing very well in school, in high school, but had not thought about going to college. You know, nobody had talked to them about how to put together a college application or how to apply or how to look for financial aid and all these kinds of things. It was started by this man who had done something similar in New York City, and now he was trying to branch out kind of nationwide. Mm-hmm. And so I worked with this organization that summer. They brought all these kids to Princeton University. They brought something like 25 or 50 kids to Princeton University. They were in classes during the day, and then on the weekend we took them to excursions. You know, we took them into New York to see a play. Mm-hmm. We took them to a baseball game, took them to see a Mets game, and that kind of thing. And one of the things that we did, because we were there in New Jersey, we took them down to the Jersey Shore. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing. There were so many kids who had never seen water before.
Nope.
They were inland, you know? They were like from Iowa and places like that. And they had never seen a body of water before. And they went nuts. They were running down to the beach, you know?
Yeah.
And we spent the whole afternoon down there just on the beach. So when you expose young people who have never had a chance, it just sort of broadens their mind so much, you know? When you expose them to these kinds of opportunities and these kinds of things and say, hey, you can do this, you can go here, you can see these kinds of things, you can participate in this, it can be life-changing, man, it really can. And so what you guys are doing there with the youth programs is it can really turn lives around and broaden people's experiences. So.
Yeah. For younger generations who may be skeptical about staying involved in local government or systems of change, what would you say to inspire them and keep the faith in these institutions? I
say you have to, and probably you've heard this from a lot of other people that you've interviewed, but you have to engage with the system in order to make changes with the system. Unfortunately, to some degree now, if you're silent, the system has a way of ignoring you because they figure you're not participatory in this. You know, it gets back to the squeaky wheel phenomenon. That's the one that, you know, gets the grease, as they say. There are ways to participate, however. You can be within the system like you and I are doing. You know, you're on the council, I'm on the Port Commission. But we've also seen in our past that you can impact the system by being outside the system and critiquing it and showing where the faults are and how the system is not doing for all. And of course, the civil rights movement is a perfect example of that. You know, Dr. King was not necessarily a part of the system. He was not an elected official. But he also helped to change the system where he saw that there were detriments and how it wasn't addressing all the needs of all the people. So there are different ways to engage, but you must engage in whatever way you decide is best for you.
Yeah.
You have to participate. You can't be silent. You can't be on the sidelines and say, this has nothing to do with me. It doesn't impact me. because it does impact you, whether you know it or not. The conditions that you are living in and what you are upset about and what you might see as a fault of the system is impacting you. And a lot of times it's impacting you because you've decided to remove yourself from it. You've not tried to engage with it or tried to voice how you feel about what the system is doing to you and to yours and to others like you. And so it continues to kind of roll over you. And so I strongly encourage young people and just people in general, because it's not even young people, it's just people in general who are not engaged with what's going on. Get informed. There are a lot of ways nowadays to get information. Try to do it from sources that are respected and, you know, that
reliable sources.
have some sort of history and, you know, pedigree to them.
The theme of this podcast is don't give up on the system. What would you say to people who feel uneasy or discouraged about the system?
I'd say that one thing they should do is really kind of take a look at the history and know the history. You know, we in some respects we've been here before, and people have banded together to change things, to make things better for as many people as they possibly could, against its seemingly unsurmountable forces against it. We've changed laws, we've changed minds, we've changed hearts to some degree, and so for folks who think that things are really bad, and there are a lot of people who are very much suffering out there in our communities. Things have been bad before, and the only way they were changed, the only way they got better, were people banding together in order to make change. You know, this country has one little fault that it likes to talk about a lot, and that's the great man theory or the great woman theory, and that you know, a great person will rise and lead you sort of to the promised land, and all you need to do is get behind the right leader, and all issues and problems will be solved. And that's hardly ever the case. It's a group of people. There were tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who were involved in the civil rights movement. People who did not make the history books, people who had no articles written about them in the newspapers, you know, people who don't have statues and monuments, you know, made to them, who actively participated and, you know, did everything that they could in order to change things for the better in this country. And that has happened throughout time. That has happened, you know, you look at history, and if you're a student of history in any sort of way, you will see that has occurred in more instances than not. And so I say to people who say that I've got no place in this, you know, it has no place for me, I'm just going to check on out, do the best I can. You know, things can change, and you and a dedicated group of people can change whatever it is that you want to change. It's the only thing that has changed things, as a matter of fact. There's no one person who's brought about change on their own. I have a little motto that I say: no one does anything of consequence by themselves. It does not happen. It does not happen. You have to have other people involved. You have to have other people committed to the same ideas and to the same issues that you are, and that's the only way that change actually comes about. So get involved. Whatever it is that you have issues with, whatever it is that you feel needs to be changed, get involved in some way, shape, or form, and let your voice be heard, because if not, your voice will be ignored. It's that simple.
See, that's deep, straight to the point, but a lot of substance. So this last question is one of my favorite questions because it's intense and it's very, you know, it's something tangible that you can leave with people watching. When your career is over, what do you hope people will remember the most about your time in office, your legacy?
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful question. I hope that people see me, see the totality of me, and not whatever my career was or not whatever office I happen to hold or whatever. And I hope people walk away saying, he was a good man. Mm-hmm. He was a decent person, and he tried to help others. Mm-hmm. If folks can walk away from that, if that's their takeaway from David Willard, when it's all said and done, I'll be a happy person. I'll leave you with one more story about my dad. So my cousin did graduate from law school. My first cousin, who my dad had a great impact on, he ended up graduating from Howard Law School, as a matter of fact. And it just so happened that on the day of his graduation, it happened to be my dad's 30th anniversary from graduating from law school. Okay. So my cousin graduated in 1984, my dad graduated in 1954. So following the graduation ceremony, the class of 1954 was going to have a little get-together, know? And it was up in one of the rooms in the law school building. So we went up to it, and, my dad's class, 1954, was only a handful of folk, it was literally, I think they had something like 14 or 15 people that were in the class. Wow. So, it was just a handful of people. And on that particular day, it was even fewer than that. I think there might have been like 12 of us, or 10 of us.
Even more time passed,
right.
Different reasons.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we were all sitting in this room, and so they started one after the other with everybody saying what they had done over the last 30 years with their life. And so people talked about they had become judges. People talked about they had won this case. People talked about I branched off from law and started this business, and I now employ so many people, and all of these kinds of accomplishments. And they went around the room, and it got to my dad, and it seemed like he was the last person that spoke. I don't know if he was or not, but it got to him. All these people had spoken about what they had done and how they had accomplished things, and they had all had stellar careers in the 30 years that they had been away. And they got to my dad, and my dad was just kind of quiet for a minute, and he said, I made a difference. And that's what we ended up putting on his tombstone. He made a difference. And, he didn't go into what cases he had won. He didn't go into, all the accolades. He was not a braggadocious guy, actually. He was a very gregarious guy, but he hardly ever talked about his accomplishments. There were things that I'm learning about my dad that I never knew growing up as a kid, that I'm learning today. He wasn't that kind of person. He wasn't boastful at all. And he said, and that's all he said. He said, I made a difference. And if somebody can say that about me when it's all said and done, that he looked out for other people, particularly the little guy who didn't have a voice, or he encouraged the little guy to participate and made his life better in some sort of way, and that he made a difference in this community and made a difference in other people's lives, I'll be a satisfied soul. I'll be a happy guy.
Wow, Doc, well, you are making a difference. Our show coming to an end. Don't give up on the system. My big brother, Dr. David Willard, I appreciate you for coming on.
Anytime, Councilman.
Thank
My
you,
pleasure.
Man.
My
Thank
pleasure.
You. I enjoyed it. Wow. Dr. David Willard is one of the smoothest brothers I ever met in my life. He dropped gems, he dropped nuggets, and he educated us on the port. And he made us understand the importance of not giving up on the system. Just know, next time we have another special guest, and I appreciate y'all for watching. Don't give up on the system. We out.